Hello everybody, my name is Daniel Moore of designmoreblog.wordpress.com, and in today's tutorial I'll show you how to make this test tube icon or logo and show you how to color it differently using one of Inkscape's cool features. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to open up a new document in Inkscape. You can just start up Inkscape and go to File, New, or it should be a new document anyway. And then to get my Inkscape window to look like this, I went to View, and then set this to Custom. So these buttons will be up here, because if you went like this, default, it's going to put it to the right side, and some of these up here. So I'm going to set it to Custom, just because I like having my buttons up there. The snapping and stuff makes more sense to me up here. So what I'm going to do first is open up the Align and Distribute panel here with this button, or you can hit Shift Control A. I'm just going to hit that button, and it'll open up this, and you're going to want Last Selected chosen, just to make it easier. And then I'm going to open up the Fill, Colors, Gradients, and Stroke properties, or hit Control Shift and F. It's going to, for me, it collapses these two windows, so I'm going to click this button here, Align and Distribute, and then go here, or drag it down to here to dock it. Drag that down a little bit. There we go. Seems good. And then the next thing we're going to want to do is get rid of this page border. I don't really like working with this, so I'm going to go to File, Document Properties, or hit Control Shift and D, and then click this, Show Page Border, turn that off. And Display Units, I'm going to set that to pixels. That's pretty good. And then I'm going to hit 1 on my keyboard to just set the view to 1, like zoom 100%. There we go. So the first thing what we're going to want to do is to create this sort of beaker top part here. So I'm going to create a rectangle about there. You can't see anything because my last fill was nothing and my stroke is white. So I'm going to set this to red by holding Shift and clicking on this color here. And that gives me a red stroke. And I'm going to set my stroke, I'm going to change this from millimeters to pixels. And I'm going to make this 15 just to make it nice and thick. There we go. And you'll see these nodes here if you have the rectangle tool on. I'm going to click and drag this node down there to make all the corners rounded. And you can see we make this sort of like chain icon right here. So that's pretty good, but I'm going to make a duplicate of that by hitting Control and D and dragging this off to the side. The reason why I want a copy of it is so that if I need to change anything, I can easily go back over here and change things as need be. I'm going to bring the opacity of this down to about in half. There we go. And now that that's done, I'm going to select my Nodes tool, or Edit Paths by Nodes. And you can see we still have this selected here. Like, we still have, Inkscape doesn't recognize this as a path. It still recognizes it as a rectangle. So in order to make it like a path, we're going to go to a path, object to path, or Shift Control C. Gonna click that, and now you'll see that it has these nodes. It put these nodes in the object, so now it recognizes it as a path, so you can edit these nodes however you want. It's weird. Sometimes my graphics card it's weird. So I'm gonna select this, click on this, and I'm going to select these two bottom nodes, and then I'm going to hit this button right up here that says Break Path at Selected Nodes. And now this broke this path right here, so I'm going to hit Delete on my keyboard after dragging that out, and I'm going to click Delete. There we go. That was the intended result. So you want your beaker to look sort of like this. But instead of these rounded ends right here, and that happens because I've chosen the rounded cap, I'm going to choose butt cap. And now that makes it have these butt caps right here, these straightened caps. That's pretty good, so I'm going to hit Control D, drag this out again, just so I can have another duplicate to work with in case I need to change anything. Like if I want this to have rounded caps, I can easily just go back and do that. Because the next thing, what we're going to want to do is... this is still recognized as a stroke, so if I try and give this a fill, it's going to go like that. We don't want that. So I'm going to get rid of this fill by clicking that X icon. So in order to make this be recognized as a fill color, I'm going to go to Path, stroke the path, and now everything, this is recognized as a fill now. So, and these nodes are now recognized. So you can drag them around and edit the path however you want. So the next thing we're going to do is make these sort of pointed ends right here. In order to do that, you're going to want to come up to here, the snap nodes, paths, and handles, turn that on if it's not turned on, and then click this button that says snap custom nodes. It should, if it's turned on, it'll look like this. So I'm going to drag both of these nodes down to their respective bottom nodes. So I'm going to click and drag this one down. That'll make that a point. And I'm click and drag this one. That'll make that a point as well. So that's pretty good. Now I'm going to hit Control and D again to drag this out. Make another copy. Then I'm going to make another rectangle. And I'm going to click and drag this to about there. And Inkscape remembers our previous choices when you make a rectangle. So I'm going to click this button up here that says Make Corners Sharp, and everything's should be nice and pretty, or nice and good to go again. So I'm going to center that up by clicking this object and then shift-clicking this object and going to Last Selected here, and then clicking this button that says Center on Vertical Axis. That's pretty good. I'm going to click and drag this down a bit, and then click and drag this to a desired length. That's pretty good. And you'll see that I have this button up here that says when scaling objects, scale stroke by the same proportion. It's making this stroke thicker than this. We don't want that. I'm going to check that off, and then I'm going to put this back to 15. Just to make it more consistent with the design. Yep, that's pretty good. So I'm going to select both of those by clicking and dragging over them. Control D to duplicate. Drag these over. And you'll see, this is a reason why I do this is because not only does it save you from having to go back and do certain things again, but it's also good to see where you've been, and you can make changes if need be. And if you're showing this to a client, you can show them the kind of work you've done. So this is pretty good. So in order to give this a sort of rounded bottom, like you'll see if I click this sort of rounded bottom here, Inkscape doesn't really have a way to round corners, not to my knowledge, at the very least, and this still is recognized as a rectangle, so we're going to do the same thing, except I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and C to make it a path. That's pretty good. And you'll see that it has those 4 corner nodes now. I'm actually going to click and drag this down a bit, just to make it a little bit longer. Okay, that's pretty good. And in order to give it that rounded sort of corner, I'm going to click my rectangle, not my rectangles, by my circles and ellipses tool, right, which is this button right here. Or you can hit L on your keyboard, I'm sure. And then I'm going to click this button that says Snap Smooth Nodes. Click that. The reason why we want that is I'll show you in a second. So I'm going to click and drag the handle from here and click and drag to make it a perfectly symmetrical circle like this. And then I'm going to grab this circle by this corner here and snap it to that quadrant point, that custom node. And you'll see that this is going a little bit outside of the rectangle. I'm going to click and drag this arrow here, holding Control, to try and make it more symmetrical. Or not symmetrical, but to make sure it fits within the design. I think I might actually have to turn on Snap to Paths. That might actually be... That's a little bit weird, but it worked the last time. Anyway, I'm going to Control D this, duplicate it, and then I'm going to click and drag over these two, and then I'm going to go to Path, Union, and you'll see that it gave us that rounded bottom, which is pretty good. Going to click both of these, center them up. They seem to be centered, so that's pretty good. So it doesn't feel right to me. I'm going to drag that over a little bit. So this is still recognized as a stroke. We haven't done anything to make this an actual path yet. and that's good. So I'm gonna click and drag this off to the side just so I have something to work with in case later. So now I'm gonna create another rectangle going about that far over the thing. I'm gonna make this blue just so you can see it a little bit better. And since this is still recognized as a stroke, if we try and do something with this and this, if we go to path difference, you'll see that it still creates that sort of end cap right there, so we don't want that. I'm going to hit Control-Z to undo that. I'm going to take this, well, I'm going to take all three of these, rather. Hit Control-D to duplicate, go over here. Click this, or click this, and hit Control, Alt, and C. That is a keyboard shortcut for making a stroke to a path. That's pretty good. And you'll see that if I go to my nodes, you'll see that it creates all those nodes that we can manipulate. So that's pretty good. This is still recognized as a path, and we want that to be a path, because this inside area is going to take away from what's behind it. So if I click both of those and then go to path difference, it creates that, it gets rid of that area right here, which is what we wanted. So now I'm going to take my nodes tool, click on this, drag and click over those, hold Control, and move these up, just so it seems a bit more consistent with the rest of the design. Now I'm going to click and drag over both of those, duplicate, turn snapping off for now, go over here, and you'll see that's pretty good. That's what we want. So the next thing I'm going to probably try and do is make these sort of indicators, these marks on the beaker, or the test tube. So in order to do that, we're going to click the rectangle tool and go over here. I'm going to get rid of the stroke by holding Shift and clicking on this X icon. And then I'm going to make it a green fill by clicking this without holding Shift. Then I'm going to click and drag and create a rectangle about that wide and about that high, just so it feels consistent with the design. Actually, I'm going to make this a little bit thinner. There we go. And I'm going to want to create 6 of these, because I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 of those in the regular design, so I'm going to hit that, or click that, hit Control-D to duplicate, while holding Control, I'm going to hit spacebar, and that'll create a copy of it. It's 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, and hold Control still, bring this one down to about here, and then let go, and that'll give you 6. Now I'm going to click and drag over all of these, and go to this button down here that says make vertical gaps between objects equal, and that'll space them out evenly. And I don't like how far up they are. I'm going to click and drag over all of them, and then hold Control and just bring those down a bit to about there. That seems pretty good. Control-D to duplicate all these, move them off to the side. Then I'm going to click and drag over all these, and then I'm going to go to Path Union just to make them all one object. Now that we have that, the next thing we're going to want to do is create this sort of liquid within the beaker. So in order to do that, I'm going to go to this icon right here that says Draw Bezier Curves. Click that, or you can hit B on the keyboard. And you're going to want this mode selected, Create Regular Bezier Path. And shape is none. Cool. So I'm going to click right outside this design here, like right about there, and then hold Control just so it locks it to the horizontal axis. Click and drag it through there, and then just finish it up around here, back to the starting point. And you'll see that it created a shape, but what we're going to focus on is this sort of inner area right here. So what I'm going to do is go back to my nodes tool, and then I'm going to go to the middle of this and click and drag that up. And then I'm going to click on that node and just drag that up a bit, and then drag this up a bit, just so it's a nice, smooth curve. Something about like that. Okay, that seems pretty good. I'm going to click and drag this to more of the middle. There we go. And then, once we're done with that, I'm going to click on this red object right here, hit Control D to duplicate it, hold Shift, click on this green shape, and then go to Path, Difference, and you won't see what it did. Well, if I drag it off, you'll see what it did. It created this sort of U shape where the object was. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. So I'm going to go to Path, Break Apart, and that'll break it up into two different paths. I'm going to hold Shift, click on this object, and then hit Delete on my keyboard. And you'll see that it gave us this little shape right here. So that's good. That's how you can create that liquid part. So I'm going to hit drag over all those, Control D to duplicate them. Then I'm going to Control D this one, make that blue. I'm going to send that to the back by hitting End on my keyboard, or you can go to this button up here, lower selection to the bottom. And then I'm going to hold Shift and use one of my arrow keys to bring this up by 10 pixels each time. That's pretty good. Then I'm going to click that, Control D again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Send that to the bottom. Or bring this up a little bit more. I'm going to make that copy red. And that seems pretty good. So I'm going to Control D all of these again, move them off to the side, and now I can start coloring this in. I'm going to bring the opacity of everything up to 100%. And I'm going to make these... I'm going to make all these objects here the color black. There we go. And then you can color this part in whatever colors you want. What I did for this was I colored it in like a dark purple, a lighter shade of that purple, and then a lighter shade of that purple. So the colors I'm going to use, I'm just going to quickly go down here. I'm going to use this dark purple for that color. Gonna go from here, I think. What was it? 400. Yeah, so I'm gonna go from this one. I'm gonna skip a shade. Go there. Go here. Skip another shade. And that's the coloring you can do there. Or you can change it from any dark color to a lighter shade if you wanted. So like, I can make this a dark blue, make this a lighter blue, make this an even lighter, and you've got that shading in now. But I'll show you a different way to color these in. It could be easier, it could be harder, we won't know. But the next thing we're going to want to do is add these circles in for the bubbles, and then the bubbles for up here too. So, to give it a little bit more, character, I'm going to click and drag to create a perfectly symmetrical circle, holding Control and Shift, like that. Then I'm going to hit Control D, drag this down to about here, holding Control and Shift, drag that down to about there, Control D, drag this down to about here, Control Shift, drag that down. I'm going to click and drag over all those, make sure that the vertical gaps are equal. I'm going to drag this in a little bit. Maybe bring that in a little bit. And that's pretty good. And we're going to give the beaker a shine, like right around here. So in order to do that, I'm going to click this circle, hit Control D, hold Shift, click on the black beaker shape here, and go to center it on the vertical axis. There we go. And I'm going to click and drag it to about here. I'm going to give it a white stroke by holding Shift and clicking the white. And I'm going to get rid of the fill by clicking this X icon. There we go. Instead of giving it 15 pixels, I'm going to make it 10. Just to do that, going to click and drag. Just till I find a good place for it. Seems pretty good. There we go. And now, Inkscape still recognizes this as a circle, so we can click and drag this and make it like a pie shape or what have you. Instead of doing that, I'm going to go to Path, Object to Path, and do pretty much the same thing as we did for this top part of the beaker here. I'm going to click and drag over those two nodes, and then click this button up here, Break Path. Then I'm going to click on both those nodes, and delete, and click on this node, hit delete. Because I have to break it first. There we go. And now you should have something like this. And the reason why it doesn't have... The reason why it has these butt caps is because we set the butt cap back to that. So I'm going to set a rounded cap, and it just makes it a little bit more consistent with the design. So that's pretty good. I'm going to click and drag over all this. Click Control D. Drag it over. And now I want to make sure that this is an actual path. So I'm going to go to Path, Stroke to Path. There we go. And now if we scale it, it stays that consistent weight. This is a path now. This is a path. That's pretty good. So now I'm going to take these three circles, hit Control D to duplicate them, and I'm going to click and drag them up to about here. And I'm going to color them in this same shade of purple here. There we go. And then I'm going to hit Control G to duplicate them, or not duplicate, but group them, Control G. And then I'm going to hold Shift, click on this beaker shape, and hit center on the vertical axis. There we go. And now it looks like it's letting a little bit of fumes come up from the beaker. So that's pretty good. And I'm going to make a set of these by hitting Control D when I click and drag over all of them. Drag them up. And I think for this design, yeah, they were pretty much the same. See what they look like. Yeah, it's pretty good. So that's how you can make that sort of thing. Now I'm going to click and drag over all this, hit Control G, and now you've got this sort of artwork that you can click and rescale to whatever size you want. So if you want to recolor this to whatever color you want, you can manually go in, like I showed you earlier, and just change the color like this. Like manually. But that might be a little bit too time consuming, so I'm going to click and drag over all of these. And then I'm going to go under to Extensions, Color, HSL Adjust. And the way this sort of works is that the hue is set in 2 degrees, and I think it's based on whatever base color you have. I'm not entirely sure. The help doesn't really help us that much. The hue, rotate by degrees, wraps around, saturation, add, subtract, minimum, -100, max 100, min, random hue, randomize the parameters values. So if we go back into options, I'm going to click on this and set this back to 0 just so we can go do this in increments. I'm going to hit live preview. You'll see nothing's happened because this is set to 0. But if I set this to like 40 and hit tab, the change should take effect momentarily. Yeah, it changes it to this pinkish color, which is pretty good. If you want to see what it looks like randomly, you can hit this random hue button, and it should update it in a second. Sets it back to the original color. Yeah, it changes the colors around. I don't really like that. I like it being more uniform. So 40 from base purple makes it more pink. So I think if we change it to like 80, it might put it to a bluish color. You have to play around with this. I've only been using this for a little bit. Okay, so it makes it more red. So if you're happy with the colors it gives you, I'm going to try for maybe 200. see what that looks like. Green, that's pretty good. I'm going to click apply. And then you've got this color variation of this. So this is a good way to see what this might look like in different colors. You have to play around the HSL adjust. I'm not entirely sure how it works just yet, but I kind of like the feature. Also, if you want to see how this looks in grayscale, you can do that by going to Extensions, Color, Grayscale, and it'll say this. And it'll make everything like a different shade of gray, just so you can see how it looks like. So, yeah, that's how you can create this Beaker icon, or this Beaker logo. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope you guys have a good day.